Congressman Ed Royce, my old colleague from California. Ed, we thank you for some of your time and your return here with us on America's Forum.
Thank you, JD. Good to be with you.
Ed, will the IMF's aid package really be enough to help the Ukraine?
You know, what would really help the Ukraine, and this might be of some consequence, but what would really be of assistance is a program that would help them develop shale gas and a program that would export our own natural gas into their market. You know, we're flaring gas here, we're capping wells. There's a way we could create tens of thousands of new jobs in the United States if we would take our natural gas and use it as a strategic advantage here. Clearly, it would also help our deficits to sell it to Ukraine and Eastern Europe. This is the request that just came this morning from the heads of state of 4 Eastern European countries that we in the United States sell them the gas. We can make a huge profit because, remember, Russia is charging monopoly prices in that region and manipulating the supply, turning off the valves in winter in order to cause consternation. So why shouldn't we do it? That is the long-term solution, and indeed, there's a lot of shale gas potential in western Ukraine. Our companies should help develop that for a profit for the United States, but for energy independence for Ukraine.
Ed, you've long been a champion of energy exploration, both in this country and obviously in the Ukraine with the tough situation the Ukrainians are facing right now. We hear so much about tough economic reforms attached to the IMF package. Are they genuinely tough economic reforms? What exactly does this package look like in exchange for the IMF money to the Ukraine?
They are tough reforms. They're the types of reforms the Poles had to make, and the Czechs. You know, when these countries are former Soviet republics, they really are pretty dysfunctional. And the introduction of the rule of law and contract, a law enforcement system that really works, empowering civil society, all of these things that we take for granted in the West are really unknown under communism. And so the Poles went through this tough transition. They're on the ground in Ukraine right now trying to assist the Ukrainians, but without leverage, without sort of forcing the issue, it's not the natural thing for people to change the way they do business.
Well, Congressman,
so I do think it's mandatory that we have this leverage, that we force the changes. I'm going over in a couple of weeks to Ukraine with a large bipartisan delegation of members to have these discussions with Ukrainian parliamentarians to try to get them Western-leaning. Yes, they can trade with the East, but they can also trade with the West. It is the breadbasket of Europe, by the way, and so there's a lot of trade they can do with the rest of Europe.
Congressman,
but they do need a lot of input.
Congressman, I know you were speaking on the House floor today about the Ukraine Support Act, and I understand there's also been some movement in Congress on the Ukrainian aid package. Can you bring us up to speed on what happened today on the congressional aid package that's, I believe, headed to the president's desk soon once some minor disagreements get worked out?
Yeah, I can. I think we passed it with about 400 votes just now into the Senate. As JD will remember, this is a little like ships passing in the night. The Senate bill is coming our way at the same time that our bill is going their way, but by the end of the day, we'll work something out and get it onto the president's desk. And the reason we're trying to work quickly on this is because if you listen carefully to the speech to the Duma, what Vladimir Putin said was that the boundaries of Russia, the Russian nation, is not confined by the current boundaries. Well, what that means is that those adjacent countries that have large Russian populations, it sounds as if Vladimir Putin is saying those are within the Russian nation. This makes people in Latvia and Estonia, Kazakhstan, very, very nervous. All around the borders of Russia, you have a situation where during Stalin's time, people were shipped to Siberia, never to return, and ethnic Russians moved into those regions in the Baltic states, etc.
And in the
so
Ukraine,
now,
still, Congressman, there's concern now about even more Russian troops massing on the border there between Russia and Ukraine. You mentioned the comments from Putin at the Duma. Can you tell us if there's already a contingency plan being talked about in Congress should Putin take that next step, if he's planning on it? We don't know that yet, but is there a contingency plan for the next step should Putin move further into the Ukraine?
The reason the European Union took its action recently, and the reason we're taking this action today in terms of sanctions, both economic and focused on the oligarchs around Putin, and certainly the threat of a massive importation of American energy into Eastern Europe, which would break the back of the Russian economy. It's 70% of their exports, 52% of their budget for their government and military. The reason we're raising the specter of this is to make certain that those troops do not go into eastern and southern Ukraine, where about 8 million people under forced collectivization and under the purges of Joe Stalin. You have about 8 million Ukrainians that perished, many of them in Siberia. And in place of that, ethnic Russians came into that area. Now, those ethnic Russians voted for independence as well, along with Ukrainians. They consider themselves Ukrainian now. They've been there, a couple of generations. But Vladimir Putin might use this as an excuse to say, here's the next step. We want to send a united message that we're going to support civil society, we're going to support Ukrainian independence, and in so doing, send the message that there's going to be severe consequences to President Putin and the Russian economy if they do not.
Ed, as we continue to watch the unfolding situation in the Ukraine, and we already saw what transpired in Crimea, the question, and we've talked about monitoring what Putin had to say in front of the Duma. There's been some talk that Putin's next target is Moldova. If you had to rank the targets geopolitically in Putin's mind, is that the next rational place to go if the Russians continue their expansion?
I've been in Moldova, and in the eastern part, in Transnistria, there is a indigenous Russian population that is still, their leadership is still very wedded to the old Stalinist order. You still see the hammer and sickle, and I was surprised when I discussed politics with the old guard in that section of the country, just how intransigent they were. I think de facto, you already have basically an independent area there. The signs say, "Remember, you are not Moldovan." So
wow.
clearly, the mindset is very fixated on this. I don't know that the Russians care that much, because de facto they're already getting Russian passports, I believe, and they're not being mistreated by Moldovans. By the way, that is a canard that we really need to address, and as part of this legislation is to broadcast into that part of the world.
And you've just reiterated that now, Ed Royce. We apologize. We're going to have to leave it there. We always thank you for your insights. As the House Foreign Affairs Committee continues its good work, we will invite you back again and again. Chairman Ed Royce of the House Foreign Affairs Committee.
Yeah, remember Radio Free Europe and how important that was in ending communism? I think the funding's been cut. Maybe needs to be restored. But more ahead on this on America's Forum right after this. Of course, you can always find us on social media. #America's Forum on Twitter @Newsmax TV.